In the early 1900s, two black brothers were born in the segregated South with a rare condition that made them targets. Their pale skin and light eyes drew stares wherever they went. Then one day, they vanished, and the truth behind their disappearance would be buried for decades. What followed was a journey through spectacle, deception, and survival. But behind it all was something stronger than fear, a mother's love that refused to die. This is a story that was almost erased until one community made sure it wouldn't be forgotten. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, consider subscribing to the channel. We'd be grateful for your support. Let's dive into it. In the black communities around Roanoke, Virginia, an eerie caution was often passed down to children. Stick together, or you might end up kidnapped like Echo and Eco. This local legend wasn't just a scary story, it was a real family's nightmare. Echo and Eco were the stage names of George and Willie Muse, two African-American brothers whose unusual appearance made them targets. They were the grandsons of formerly enslaved people, born around the turn of the 20th century to sharecropper parents in the rural hamlet of Truvine, Virginia. George and Willie were the eldest of 5 siblings raised by their mother, Harriet Muse. Like their neighbors, the Muse family toiled on a tobacco farm, working from can see to can't see, daylight to dark, to scrape by. It was a life of poverty and hard labor. But for the Muse boys, life carried extra burdens that set them apart from everyone around them. Both brothers were born with albinism, a genetic condition that gave them white skin, snow-white hair, and striking pale blue eyes despite their black heritage. In the segregated South, these features made them stand out in every crowd. The boys also suffered from nystagmus, an eye condition common in albinism that left their vision poor and sensitive to light. By the time George was 6 and Willie was 9, permanent furrows had formed on their young foreheads from years of squinting against the bright Virginia sun as they worked in the fields. Harriet did all she could to protect her sons. She even fashioned improvised head wraps to shield them from the sun. But there was only so much a black mother in the Jim Crow era could do. The Muse brothers grew up in a world of unforgiving heat, manual labor, and the ever-present shadow of racial violence. Being black in the early 1900s South meant living under constant threat. Being black with albinism made the boys even more vulnerable. Locals whispered that sinister opportunists roamed the countryside, looking for freaks to snatch away. Harriet warned her sons never to talk to strangers, but the danger was closer than she knew. Truvine itself was little more than a church crossroads and a handful of cabins, but it carried a prophetic name. It came from a Bible verse in the Gospel of John. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. For the black sharecroppers who made their home there, Truvine symbolized the hope that faith would sustain them through hardship. Harriet clung to that hope as she raised her children under the thumb of white landowners and the clan presence that lurked in surrounding counties. She probably never imagined that a different kind of predator, one not deterred by faith or community, was watching her boys. But one fateful day in 1899, that predator struck. It happened on an ordinary afternoon while the Muse brothers were out in the tobacco field, dutifully plucking hornworms off the leaves under the blistering sun. A white man had been lurking at the edge of the field, observing the two light-skinned black children at work. He was what people in those days called a freak hunter, a scout for carnival sideshows looking for human curiosities to exhibit. His name was James Candy Shelton, and when he saw George and Willie, he knew he had struck gold. Stories would later say that Candy Shelton approached the boys offering the simplest of lures, a piece of candy. In the short moment it took for one of the boys to run to the shed to fetch a tool, Shelton whisked them away. At the dawn of the 1900s, traveling circuses and their sideshow freak exhibitions were at the height of popularity. Men like Candy Shelton roamed the country's back roads on the lookout for new curiosities to exploit. Decades earlier, P.T. Barnum had found fame exhibiting acts like Chang and Ing, conjoined twin brothers from Siam, and the wild men of Borneo, two American dwarf siblings billed as feral cannibals. The public paid handsomely to gawk at humans labeled as monsters or marvels. An albino black child, or better yet two, was a sideshow promoter's dream. Seeing George and Willie's pale eyes and light hair, Shelton knew he had found a lucrative treasure. Albinism was rare enough that few had ever encountered it, and the boy's condition could be spun into any exotic fantasy the circus desired. In the eyes of showmen, the Muse brothers were perfect freak show material, different enough to draw huge crowds, yet healthy enough to endure years of exhibition. Candy Shelton had no intention of letting such a prize slip away. George, 6, and Willie, 9, vanished from Truvine in an instant, leaving behind a bewildered family and a community that would add a new chapter to its oral warnings. Harriet Muse's worst fear had come to life. Her sons were gone. In the aftermath, neighbors recalled how the distraught mother searched frantically, to no avail. Some in Truvine said the boys had been kidnapped by a stranger with candy. Others whispered that perhaps a desperate deal had gone wrong, that maybe someone in the family had allowed the boys to go with the carnival, not realizing they'd never return. Regardless of how it happened, the outcome was the same. By nightfall, George and Willie were lost to the Muse family. Truvine's name took on a deeper meaning for Harriet now, as she prayed for a miracle and clung to the promise that one day the branches she had grown would bear fruit and return to her. For the next 13 years, Harriet waited, searched, and never gave up hope that her stolen sons would find their way home. Little did she know the extraordinary odyssey George and Willie were about to endure under the garish lights of the circus. When George and Willie first opened their eyes in captivity, they found themselves thrust into a living nightmare. The two young boys were dragged from their family and plunged into the chaos of traveling carnivals and sideshows. As they sobbed and begged for their mother, their new owner, Candy Shelton, responded with chilling cruelty. "Quit crying, your mama is dead." Those words extinguished the last flicker of hope the brothers had of seeing home again. In truth, Harriet Muse was very much alive and searching for her children, but George and Willie, isolated and terrified, believed they had lost everything. From the moment they were kidnapped, the Muse brothers were treated not as children, but as property. Shelton quickly rebranded them with exotic stage names, Echo and Eco, to make them sound mysterious to white audiences. He carted them across the country, shuttling them between circuses and exploiting them under one promoter after another. For years, they were passed around the carnival circuit, performing in sideshows wherever crowds would pay to see them. The brothers received no education, not a single day of school, and not a penny of the wealth they generated. They performed in threadbare clothes and survived on meager food, utterly at the mercy of their handlers. Every time the boys asked to go home, they were met with lies and dismissals until eventually they stopped asking. On the midway and under the big top, George and Willie were advertised as freaks of nature. They were promoted under a rotating catalog of demeaning names, each new title playing on racist fascination. In one show, they might be billed as Eastman's Monkey Men or the Ethiopian Monkey Men, implying they were feral creatures captured from some jungle. At another, they donned tattered missionary robes to become the ministers from Dahomey, marketed as bizarre African savages preaching in gibberish. No outrageous claim was off limits if it sold tickets. Sideshow barkers concocted elaborate backstories to enthrall the crowds. Tales that the boys came from a hidden island or a far-flung land where people like them ran wild. Audiences gawked at George and Willie as the ringmaster hyped them as Barnum's original monkey men, supposedly discovered in the depths of Africa, or perhaps as visitors from another planet. One veteran showman, Al G. Barnes, later admitted that the circus spun whatever wild yarns it pleased about Echo and Iko. He even boasted in his memoir of fabricating a story about an island of sheep-headed people supposedly inhabited by the Muse brothers, commenting with cruel indifference that the boys had a very low grade of intelligence and the press agent story fitted them well. In the eyes of such exploiters, George and Willie were not children at all. They were sideshow attractions to be packaged, displayed, and degraded for profit. Life in the sideshow was harsh and often frightening. Crowds would line up to stare and laugh, sometimes even poking at the brothers as if they were animals in a cage. White spectators tugged at the boys' unusual flaxen hair to see if it was real. To enhance their otherworldly appearance, circus operators let the brothers' hair grow into long, wild dreadlocks and dressed them in gaudy costumes, velvet suits with bright red sashes or fur-trimmed robes to exaggerate their features. George and Willie spent long days standing under hot canvas tents, vision blurring from the glare of gaslights, while curious patrons paid coins to snap photographs beside the freaks. All the while, the brothers were under strict supervision. They ate, slept, and traveled under watch, never allowed to roam freely in the towns they passed. Any contact with their family was out of the question. In time, the two learned that survival meant obedience and emotional numbness. Together, they endured the taunts and prying eyes, finding small comfort in each other's presence when the crowds were gone. Then, amid this darkness, a surprising spark of hope emerged. Through music. One afternoon, as the story goes, a circus photographer handed the boys a banjo and a guitar as props for a publicity photo. He assumed it would be a funny joke. Surely two primitive children who'd never been schooled couldn't play a note. But George and Willie proved everyone wrong. Left alone with the banjo and guitar, the brothers quietly tuned the strings and began picking out a melody by ear. To the astonishment of their handlers, they could play, and not just a little. They discovered that they had a natural gift. They could teach themselves almost any tune on a variety of instruments. From that day forward, Echo and Eco were no longer just silent exhibits behind a sideshow banner. They became performers. As teenagers on the carnival circuit, the Muse brothers transformed their act with music. George, though only 3 years older, took on a protective, guiding role and became the voice for both of them. He spoke for the pair when dealing with outsiders, while Willie, shy and nearly blind, expressed himself through song. Night after night, Willie's gentle voice and the twang of stringed instruments floated out from the sideshow tent, adding a strangely human beauty to an inhuman scene. The brothers taught themselves popular tunes of the day, ragtime numbers, folk songs, and, during World War I, the sentimental anthem, "It's a Long Way to Tipperary," a song about longing for home that held special meaning for them. In moments when the crowds had gone and they strummed that melody together, George and Willie could almost feel a connection to the life and mother they had lost. Their musical ability made Echo and Eco even more marketable. The circus masters realized they could present the brothers not only as freakish curiosities, but as genuine entertainers. By the early 1920s, the Muse brothers were headlining larger and larger shows, advertised as the ambassadors from Mars who could miraculously play instruments and sing. Audiences were astonished to see the so-called creatures perform lively duets on guitar and mandolin with impeccable skill. This combination of spectacle and real talent turned George and Willie into one of the most popular sideshow acts of their era. Without ever planning to, the two brothers had found a way to reclaim a piece of their dignity. They won the crowd's applause not just for their looks, but for their artistry. Of course, they were still not free and saw none of the riches their fame generated, but their rising stardom was setting the stage for an even greater turn of events. By the mid-1920s, the Muse brothers' notoriety was so great that the legendary Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus came calling, eager to feature Echo and Eco as star attractions. By the mid-1920s, George and Willie Muse had ascended to the highest echelon of circus life. The Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, hailed as the greatest show on earth, added Echo and Eco to its roster, and the two brothers became one of its star attractions. The scale of the Ringling Show was almost unbelievable, a traveling city of trains and tents carrying hundreds of performers and animals, with 5 rings and 6 stages under the canvas. In that whirlwind, the Muse brothers stood out as a headline act. They were advertised across the United States as the sheep-headed cannibals from Ecuador, mysterious albino men supposedly captured in a far-off land. Never mind that George and Willie had never set foot outside Virginia. To the circus promoters, their true origins didn't matter. What mattered was that audiences were fascinated by them, and tickets were selling by the thousands. On stage, Echo and Eco now wore tailored tuxedos with bright red sashes, adding a touch of surreal elegance to their appearance. Their golden dreadlocked hair, which they would dramatically unveil from under enormous caps, and their lively musical performances made their act unlike any other sideshow. In an era when most freak exhibits sat motionless as onlookers gawked, the Muse brothers brought the house down with live music. Curious crowds expecting a brutish spectacle instead saw two impeccably dressed gentlemen playing the mandolin and guitar with remarkable skill. The combination was enthralling and deeply strange. Were these men supposed to be wild primitives or sophisticated entertainers? In truth, they were both, victims on display, yet also performers captivating crowds with genuine talent. Newspapers ran excited headlines whenever the circus came to town, eagerly publicizing Echo and Eco's exotic personas. One report claimed the brothers had been found adrift on a raft off the coast of Madagascar. Another insisted they were ambassadors from Mars, discovered crawling out of a crashed spaceship in the Mojave Desert. The more outrageous the tale, the more the public ate it up. Behind the scenes, of course, George and Willie still enjoyed none of their fame's benefits. Candy Shelton remained by their side, styling himself as their manager, and he made certain that any money generated by Echo and Ico flowed into circus coffers and into his own pockets. By now, the brothers had toured across the country, playing to packed tents from small towns to major cities. One of their performances in New York reportedly drew an astonishing 10,000 spectators to Madison Square Garden, all eager to catch a glimpse of the famous Muse brothers. There were even rumors that Echo and Eco traveled across the ocean to perform for the King of England at Buckingham Palace, a story the brothers themselves loved to tell, though it was never confirmed. The Ringling publicity machine milked the brothers' unusual condition for all it was worth. Photographs of Eco and Eco appeared on posters and in newspapers nationwide, their eyes painted ghostly white and hair teased into shocking halos, with lurid captions like "not totally human." Yet even some contemporary observers noted that the Muse brothers offered more than cheap shock value. They had personality and showmanship. As one circus reviewer observed, Echo and Eco were far more interesting than they were grotesque. Crowds cheered when the brothers launched into a jaunty ragtime tune or harmonized on a sentimental ballad, experiences that left many audience members oddly charmed, even as they were being invited to laugh at the performers' supposed strangeness. Through all of this, the memory of home never left George and Willie. They still ended their musical set with their favorite piece, "It's a Long Way to Tipperary," as a private nod to the mother and siblings they believed were gone. Night after night under the spotlight, as they sang about faraway loved ones, the brothers felt the ache of their own loss. They had no idea that back in Virginia, their mother Harriet Muse was very much alive, and she had never stopped looking for them. Harriet had left the sharecropper fields and moved into Roanoke City, not long after her sons disappeared, seeking any lead while she worked as a maid and laundress. Illiterate and recently widowed, she relied on word of mouth and intuition, but she never gave up the search. Whenever a carnival or sideshow came through Virginia, Harriet would be there, asking questions and scanning every sideshow lineup for two light-skinned boys. She even took out a newspaper advertisement at one point, offering a reward for news of her missing children. In 1927, that faith and persistence finally bore fruit. Family lore says Harriet dreamed that her sons were coming back to her, and shortly afterward she got word that the enormous Ringling Brothers Circus was due to visit Roanoke. The posters and flyers boasted of ambassadors from Mars and Ecuadorian sheepmen. To most people in town, those titles were just clever advertising, but Harriet knew instantly in her heart, her George and Willie were with that show. After 13 long years of praying and searching, Harriet Muse steeled herself. If the circus was bringing her sons home to Roanoke, she would be there to meet it and face down anyone, no matter how powerful, to reclaim her boys. Harriet knew the danger of what she planned. A black woman defying white circus bosses in the Jim Crow South could be risking her life. Yet she did not flinch. "They can lynch me if they want," Harriet vowed, "but I'm going to get my boys back." On October 14, 1927, the day of reckoning finally arrived. The Ringling Brothers Circus roared into Roanoke and raised its tents on the fairgrounds. Harriet Muse was there early, blending into the throngs of visitors beneath the big top. All around her, excited white townsfolk pressed forward to see the curiosities and wonders on display. Harriet's heart pounded as she scanned the sideshow tent, desperate to catch a glimpse of the two performers she knew were her sons. Above the tent entrance hung a huge banner depicting two wild-haired albino men and blaring the question, "Are they ambassadors from Mars?" The mostly white audience filed in, laughing and gawking at various oddities, but Harriet had eyes only for the stage where a mandolin and guitar were being played by familiar hands. She pushed and elbowed her way insistently through the crowd, determined to get to the front. Inside on the small sideshow stage, George and Willie Muse, Echo and Eco, were halfway through a tune, squinting into the sea of faces. They could barely see past the footlights, but suddenly George's eye caught a figure that made him stop cold. Right in front, a black woman in a simple black dress and worn shoes stood trembling, tears in her eyes. He would have known that face anywhere, even after 13 long years. "There's our dear old mother," George shouted, dropping his mandolin. "Look, Willie, she is not dead." Willie's guitar fell silent. In an instant, the two brothers leapt off the stage and ran into Harriet's arms. Mother and sons clung to each other, sobbing with joy. Harriet covered her boys' faces with kisses and tears, barely able to choke out their names between grateful sobs. George, now a grown man in his late 20s, and Willie, in his mid-20s, held their mother as if afraid to ever let go again. In that moment, it was as if no one else existed in the world except the three of them, reunited at long last. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the mostly white crowd. They had no idea that the men from Mars had a mother in the audience, a mother who had just shattered the circus illusion to reclaim her children. The circus ringmaster and sideshow manager immediately realized their prized act was slipping away. These two performers were a major attraction, in their minds property worth a fortune, and now a black woman was about to take them. Fearing a public scene, the circus staff hurriedly summoned local police for help. Soon a squad of Roanoke police officers, as many as 8 by some accounts, rushed to the tent to confront Harriet. The fairgrounds where they stood had hosted a massive Ku Klux Klan rally only a year earlier, and now white officers encircled a lone black woman holding onto her sons. Spectators fell silent, sensing the tension. A circus official demanded that Harriet release his performers at once. But Harriet Muse refused to budge. She squared her shoulders, tightened her grip on George and Willie, and faced down the police and circus men alike. If these men intended to drag her away, they would have to pry her sons from her arms in front of everyone. For a moment, the air was thick with the possibility of violence. Yet no one dared lay a hand on Harriet. Perhaps it was the sight of this determined mother and her weeping sons, or the whispering crowd that was growing increasingly sympathetic to her, but the authorities hesitated. In that pregnant pause, Harriet marched her boys out of the sideshow tent, never once looking back. A few people in the audience began to clap, and then a cheer went up as word spread of what had happened. Many spectators, white and black, were moved moved by the unprecedented scene. A mother's love had triumphed over the circus's spectacle. Against all odds, Harriet had won. She had walked into the lion's den of Jim Crow and emerged with George and Willie by her side. Just 3 days after reclaiming her sons, Harriet marched into a Roanoke courtroom to demand justice. She proved that her victory was no fluke. She pressed it home in court. Harriet Muse sued the Ringling Brothers Circus for kidnapping and enslaving her children. Her lawyer argued that the circus had effectively turned George and Willie into slaves for profit, holding them against their will in violation of every basic right. The sensational story hit newspapers nationwide, and the public, now fully aware of the Muse brothers' ordeal, overwhelmingly supported the mother who had fought to free her boys. Bowing to pressure and bad publicity, the circus quickly settled the case rather than face a prolonged legal battle. In the settlement, Ringling Brothers agreed to pay the Muse family a sum in back wages for George and Willie's years of unpaid labor. More importantly, the circus formally relinquished any claim of ownership over the brothers. In late 1927, a judge approved the agreement, legally cementing George and Willie's freedom. The circus's bondage over the Muse brothers was broken at last. After over a decade in captivity, the Muse brothers were finally going home with their mother. Harriet's iron will had prevailed, and her boys, now grown men, were free citizens once more. It was an astonishing triumph for a poor, uneducated black woman in the heart of the Jim Crow South, and it marked the end of one heartbreaking chapter of the Muse brothers' lives, and the beginning of another. George and Willie Muse's story did not end with their dramatic liberation. In 1928, just months after regaining their freedom, the brothers chose to return to the only work they had ever known, the circus, but this time on their own terms. Ringling Brothers agreed to rehire Echo and Eco as paid performers rather than captive curiosities. For the first time, they could take the stage without fear, performing because they wanted to, not because they were forced. The brothers even began to take genuine pride in their act now that it was under their own control. Under a new contract negotiated in the wake of the lawsuit, the Muse brothers received fair wages for their shows, and a portion of their salary was sent directly to their family back in Virginia. The circus even hired their younger brother, Tom Muse, as a roustabout, ensuring that George and Willie would have kin with them on the road. Back under the big top, Echo and Eco continued to draw huge crowds, now as headline stars advertised with a bit more honesty. Newspapers still played up their exotic appeal, but the brothers were introduced as talented mandolin and guitar players, as often as they were called men from Mars. Over the late 1920s and 1930s, George and Willie traveled wider than ever, performing not only across the continental United States, but even on distant tours that reached places like the Hawaiian Islands. They appeared in opening day reports for Ringling's season at Madison Square Garden, and their names were even mentioned in the New York Times on Circus Day. By some accounts, they got the opportunity to meet British royalty during an overseas exhibition. What had once been a life of total bondage had transformed into a legitimate career as celebrated entertainers. None of this would have been possible without Harriet Muse's vigilant oversight. Even after relinquishing her sons to the circus once more, Harriet remained their guardian angel. Whenever a manager or sideshow promoter tried to swindle or mistreat George and Willie, Harriet did not hesitate to invoke the law again. On multiple occasions in the 1930s, she hauled circus management into court for violating the terms of their agreements, and each time she won additional settlements to protect her sons. She insisted that the circus keep her informed of George and Willie's whereabouts on tour, and she carefully saved the money they sent home for the family's future. With those savings, Harriet was able to purchase a small farm in Franklin County and later invest in a comfortable house in Roanoke. Harriet Muse passed away in 1942 at the age of 64, her big heart finally giving out after a lifetime of struggle. Due to hard times, her family could not afford a headstone, and Harriet was buried in an unmarked grave in a segregated cemetery. But her legacy lived on in the security she had won for her sons. Fittingly, she spent her last years seeing her boys become financially secure and relatively independent. The money she had set aside from the circus settlements became the foundation of a new life for George and Willie. By the mid-1950s, the brothers, now middle-aged, finally retired from the traveling show business. In truth, the era of the old-fashioned sideshow was coming to an end by that time. Public taste and laws were beginning to turn against such human exhibitions. George and Willie had lived to see the twilight of the freak show tradition that once exploited them. In 1961, using the nest egg their mother had built for them, they moved into a brick house in Roanoke, becoming homeowners in a time when very few African Americans in Virginia owned property. In that home, the Muse brothers lived out their days in peace, cared for by loving relatives. Their great niece, Nancy Saunders, tended to them in their old age and fiercely guarded their privacy, much as Harriet had done. George Muse died in 1972 of heart failure at roughly 79 years old. Willie Muse lived on to see the dawn of a new millennium. He passed away in 2001 at the astonishing age of 108. In their long lives, the brothers witnessed times change in ways they could scarcely have imagined during their youth. Yet even as decades passed, they never forgot their mother's courage and sacrifice. In his later years, Willie often sat by a silver-framed photograph of Harriet and recounted to visitors how she had stood up to the cops and circus bigwigs back in 1927 to bring him and George home. He liked to remind people that he managed to outlive every person who had ever exploited him, including Candy Shelton, whom Willie bluntly labeled the scum of the earth, the only person he ever truly hated. Today, the saga of George and Willie Muse, the True Vine brothers, endures as a resonant piece of American history. Their journey from the tobacco fields of Virginia through the cruel carnival sideshows and finally back to hard-won freedom is a testament to resilience in the face of racism and injustice. It was the love of a determined black mother and the unbreakable bond between two brothers that ultimately unlocked their shackles. The Muse brothers' story, once whispered as a cautionary tale, now lives on as an inspiration, a reminder that courage and family can light the way even in the darkest of circumstances. Decades later, their tale has been preserved in history books and in Beth Macy's acclaimed book True Vine, ensuring that the Muse brothers' extraordinary journey will never be forgotten. For Black Americans, this story is a poignant reflection of their heritage, a victory snatched from the jaws of injustice, and a celebration of strength, dignity, and perseverance against all odds. If you're into powerful stories that open your eyes and make you think, you're in the right place. Hit that like button if you learned something new, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. We've got more stories on the way, and trust us, you won't want to miss them.